Thank you all for joining us today. You're joining us for Ohio State Leading in the Face of Adversity webinar. All attendees are muted and we are not streaming your videos. This session is being recorded. If you have a question throughout the webinar, please add it into the chat box or into the Q&A feature. We will be getting to some of those questions at the end of the presentation. So to kick us off today, Tamar, you're up.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining the University Archives. We're going to look at the way the university has faced adversity during our first 150 years. As Casey just said, I'm Tamar Chute. I'm the University Archivist, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. But joining me, and more important in the conversation, are three archivists from the University Archives. Michelle Drobick is our reference archivist. Kevlin Hare is our assistant university archivist. And Hallie Mayers is our University Archives specialist. So just to give you a sense of how we started creating this presentation, a number of weeks ago, the staff at the Alumni Magazine asked the archives to look at how the university had dealt with challenges over time. So we were working on that. We were already working remotely, so we couldn't go digging through the files at the archives, but we searched our digitized resources to see what we could find. And that's how we came up with this webinar. Now, in the amount of time we have, because we want to make sure to have time for questions, we will not touch every challenge that Ohio State has faced in 150 years. In fact, I think each of the areas we will cover could be its own webinar. So we will do our best. As Casey mentioned, we will answer some questions at the end. If we don't know the answer, we will do the research into your question and get back to you with what we have. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first question I'm going to pose to our panelists is, can you all give some examples of the roles that faculty and staff have played in times of adversity?
Sure. Well, the university has faced adversity from the very beginning, but people have stepped up and done what needed to be done. What was then known as the Ohio Agricultural and Mechanical College opened on September 17th, 1873. And the very next day, a national banking concern, J. Cook and Company, declared bankruptcy, setting off an economic crisis that was known for years as the Great Depression, actually until the Great Depression of the 1930s. So times were very lean for the new college. You see in that picture, that's University Hall. At the time we opened, it was known as the classroom building, and 24 students who showed up were admitted to take classes from, next slide please, these fine gentlemen who were hired to teach them. They are the first faculty of the university. But because of financial constraints, we didn't really have a support system for them, certainly not like today when we have physical facilities and business and finance. So these gentlemen had to take on extra duties, I think duties that they probably didn't know they were signing up for when they were hired. I'll give you a couple of examples. Next slide, please. Here's Norton Townsend, looking every bit the academic he was. He originally studied medicine, but over the years he became known as an expert in agriculture and a great supporter of agriculture. And actually he was named to the first Board of Trustees in 1870 by Governor Rutherford B. Hayes. But after that board figured out where we were going to be located and what curriculum we were going to teach, he stepped down in 1873 to teach agriculture. Now, as a land-grant institution, we were teaching practical methods. So in agriculture, we needed a farm to teach students better methods of farming, obviously. So next slide. Here's a later picture of our university farm where there were, barns and equipment and animals, and someone had to manage it. So Norton Townsend was picked because he was professor of agriculture. I can't find any evidence that he had ever run a farm in his life, but there he was running it for the university. Next slide. This gentleman's my favorite example, Robert McFarlane. He was originally from Scotland. He was hired to be professor of mathematics and of engineering. He ended up actually teaching military tactics because of all the faculty. He was the only one who had served in the Civil War. So he actually had some experience. because he had been, and I don't know why, groundskeeper at Miami University at some point in his career. He was, of course, named grounds superintendent in addition to his teaching duties. And so next slide, please. He was given charge of the campus at that time. Here's an early map of campus. At one point, the Board of Trustees actually asked him to do a survey, since he had an engineering background, and figure out the best place for a sewer system for the new campus. In 1875, he was also named University Bursar, I'm guessing because he was good at math. But for that job, he actually was paid extra each term. Next slide.
We're going to shift forward a little bit to World War I, where I'm going to talk about how the faculty and staff helped locally in the community, but also globally. So here in the community, one of the big things they did was expand agricultural extension. The food supply during the time was a big issue, and making sure we had enough food to feed people at home and overseas. So the faculty and staff went out to the community. They taught farmers how about new equipment, about some new proper techniques that were up and coming. They also showed them things like how to do soil and fertilizer testing, really trying to get out and educate people the best way that they could. Next slide, please. This didn't stop out on the field. It migrated into the home, where we have home economics professor Edna White, who created a committee of women who maintained a food committee in every county, where they taught people about war gardens, poultry raising, milk production. They also handed out publications on food conservation to teach people about canning vegetables, making victory bread, and also how to keep a garden at the time. Next slide, please. We're going to talk a little bit about the medical effort during the time. Obviously, a lot of faculty and staff and students contributed to helping the war effort. I'm just going to give you a few examples. So on the left here, we have Vern Dodd, and he was a faculty member of surgery. He actually put together a hospital unit for the Naval Reserves that was comprised of all faculty members from different departments in the College of Medicine. And they went to France and served in field hospitals where they saw about 750 patients a day. On the right here is Lieutenant Colonel Harry Snively. He earned 3 degrees from Ohio State, including his medical degree. He organized a medical regiment out of the Ohio National Guard, where he served, and so they went over to Europe, and he served as a field director in Belgium, France, and Russia before helping people in Poland with a typhoid outbreak. Next slide, please. Faculty and staff also helped out in more specialized ways. So specifically, John Means and George Schaefer were surgeons, and they went over to France on the fields to help with facial reconstruction, largely fixing bones and some large wounds. Next slide, please. So we're going to shift gears a little bit to talk about the 1918 influenza pandemic. The most prominent person during this on campus was Dr. H. Schindel-Wingert. He came to Ohio State as a physical education professor and was actually our director of athletics before he became our first director of student health services. There's 2 things that he did that were really instrumental in helping Ohio State through the pandemic. The first is his belief in prevention. So early in 1918, when we started to see the flu starting to come into different parts of the United States, he was really vocal about encouraging students to wash their hands and cover their mouths when they cough and sneeze. And then the other thing that he did was when we were under restrictions, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, he was really important in coordinating efforts between different departments, such as the hospital and the union and the local Red Cross, with making sure that everyone who was sick was receiving the care that they needed and the supplies so that they had the greatest chance of survival. Next slide, please.
So we're moving on to World War II now. During this war, it was estimated that Ohio State contributed more than a third of its employees to war service. While some university staff that possessed special skills were freed for war duty, others changed gears and were focused on a variety of research work. Some of these projects included weapons research, working with agricultural extension, or providing the products that were necessary for the war. Next slide, please. On campus, many faculty and staff members had to make enormous adjustments to their work life in the wartime environment. Some staff became involved in coordinating the specialized military training programs on campus, while others were teaching additional classes in an accelerated curriculum. Either way, for many, the workloads were doubled. In 1942, a faculty university committee on war activities was created and headed by Professor Henry Hoagland. The function of the committee was to coordinate the faculty, staff, and student efforts during the wartime on campus. This included arranging the university's resources, laboratories, and classrooms. And research facilities at the university were also made available for war use. Next slide, please. The majority of the research during this time was focused directly on war-related problems. All research was placed under the director of Dr. Ray Olpen, the director of the Research Foundation. The university entered into many contracts with the War Department during this time. One of the top secret projects taking place on campus under the Research Foundation was work that contributed to the development of the atomic bomb. At the time, it was called the Manhattan District Project. OSU professor Herrick Johnston, who had previously been working in the field of cryogenics, was the lead researcher on the two foundation projects pertaining to the atomic bomb. Dr. Johnston supervised around 30 research scientists, engineers, and assistants on the Manhattan Project at OSU, but it's estimated that more than 100 alumni, faculty, and staff had a direct hand in the project. Many professors and OSU graduates were also employed in the plants and laboratories of the Manhattan Project, which were situated in several locations around the United States. Next slide, please.
Well, thanks for getting into that first question. So right now we're going to concentrate a little bit more on the role that students played and what different things they did during these times of adversity.
Well, as I said earlier, there were a lot of financial constraints on the then college when it started. And so not only did faculty have to step up, but so did students. And these are little ways that students helped out, but it really shows what a kind of a do-it-yourself university we were in the beginning. If you look at the photo, in the background is then University Hall. This is looking north. And on the left is a dirt road that would eventually become Neal Avenue. At the time we opened in 1873, there was supposed to be a gas plant that would provide gas for lighting and for labs. However, it hadn't been completed. So a student volunteered each week to carry a rubber bag 3 miles to downtown Columbus to get it filled with gas and then walked the 3 miles back. And this went on for more than a year. And on nice days, it probably would have been a nice volunteer job, but as we all know in Columbus, there aren't a lot of nice days. And so it was often an arduous task, I'm sure. Next slide. When we opened, we were on the old Neal farm, which was then out in the middle of nowhere. And the university, the university didn't have any communication with downtown Columbus, which meant if there was some kind of an emergency, some kind of fire emergency, or they needed the police, they couldn't call them. So several faculty members recruited several students who were interested in electricity, and together they erected poles and climbed trees to hang telegraph wire to run from campus downtown to the Western Union Telegraph Company. And they finished that project in 1875. Next slide.
So the women's effort during World War I was, as many can imagine, it was one really of largely support. And this came in the way of nursing, fundraising, and creating drives for needed material. I'm just going to spend some time talking a little bit about the women's effort. Obviously, all students were very instrumental. I think it might be a good space with our limited time to talk about some of the things that they participated in and were given the ability to participate in. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, one of the things that was really big during this time was bandage making and rolling. So the front lines were running out of gauze. So they were really encouraging women to make their own bandages and roll them and then send them to the field hospitals. Similar to today where we don't have face masks for everyone, so people are being encouraged to make their own and make them for others. This is actually a local Red Cross volunteer who's working on rolling bandages on an electrical machine that was developed by electrical engineers, professors that were here at Ohio State, really increasing the efficiency that our volunteers could roll bandages. Women did other things such as sewing and repairing clothing for men at Camp Sherman, and also helping to feed soldiers after they returned to war. Next slide, please. So when women weren't helping the war effort, they were trying to get involved in different student-run organizations. So with men off to war, there were a lot of different positions opening up, and women took the opportunity to participate in them. We can see this particularly in the Ohio State Lantern, which is the newspaper, and the Macchio, which is the yearbook. Next slide, please. So these are yearbook pages, and you can see that we have our first editor-in-chief for the Macchio, who is a woman, who was able to step into that role because her counterpart, the other editor-in-chief, he was called into the service. But if you look at the list of the people on the staff, you can see there are a lot more women involved. And I think in total there were 18 women who were on the publication and 13 men who were editors. Next slide, please. So the same can be said for the Lantern. So if you just look at the photo of the Lantern staff, look how many women are in this photo. We don't have an editor-in-chief, but we have a lot of women who were entering as editors. Women usually were writing for the weekly page, and when men left, they stopped writing for the women's weekly page and started writing regular stories. So it really allowed them the chance to step into some of these roles that they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Next slide, please.
So during World War II, the university adjusted itself to completely different conditions. 3 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Beavis gathered together a mass meeting of students in University Hall in an attempt to answer the universal question they had at the time, which is, what should I do? President Beavis reminded the students that in an all-out war, and I quote, schools take their place alongside factories and training camps as necessary agencies of preparation for war. During the winter break of 1941, President Beavis sent letters to parents of students. The essence of his advice to students was stay in school until called. He went on to say, it is my firm belief that every man and woman has some job to do. For many, it is in the armed forces. For many, it is in war industry. For many others, it is in the home. For thousands of our young people, the immediate task is to be found in preparing for the days that lie ahead. Next slide, please. Many students did enlist or were called to the war. For example, by the spring of 1943, there was a reduction of nearly half of the student enrollment from the year before. Next slide, please. The wartime situation emphasized the need for college-trained people, and students did step up to the task. With many men off to the war, and women made up a large part of the student population. Beavis suggested that women students give thought to the possibility of changes in their programs, which could help to fit them for work where an urgent war need existed. Next slide. One of the special courses related to the war effort was a mechanical drafting class for women. The evening course was part of the Engineering Science and Management Defense Training Program. The staff expected the enrollment to be about 50 individuals or so, but actually 150 women showed up. Another part of the Campus War program for women was the university's National Service Curricula. This program trained women in their senior year directly for war work. The classes offered included accounting, industrial management, industrial engineering, and statistics. Next slide.
So in terms of a little bit more related to students, but also the faculty, how have academics been changed or affected during the crisis?
So during World War I, the most obvious consequence is that we had less students. As Michelle mentioned, this is the same in World War II. With less students and less faculty, we had departments that completely shut down. So for example, the law school just stopped teaching courses. There wasn't enough faculty to teach classes and there wasn't enough students. We also see the German department, which had about 50% of those enrolled were taking a German class, went down to just 100 students taking a class. Many students left for the war effort, so we see many medical students leaving to enlist in where they could help medically. A lot of ag students left to contribute to the food supply, so they went to work on farms. We do see an increase in enrollment in certain classes, like military hygiene, public health problems, and preventative medicine. So I think the conclusion that we can kind of draw from this is that it really depended on how classes could help the war effort. So if there were ways that they could support and increase information about any problems that we were having with the war, then enrollment would increase in those classes. Next slide, please.
Academics were affected greatly during World War II as well. The university began an accelerated program of curriculum, which was stated as one of the most important war efforts of the time. The purpose of the accelerated schedule was to enable the students to make faster progress and to step up the output of graduates, especially in technical and scientific areas. President Vivas described the curriculum as a full rotation of courses in 9 months instead of 12. Along with the accelerated curriculum, professional schools like dentistry and medicine also increased their class sizes. Night courses were also increased and intensified to train men and women for vital industries. The night program was later called the Twilight School, and as of the 1942-43 school year, it had 84 courses with full university credit. Next slide, please. Other highlights to the course curriculum during the Second World War included new physical education classes, which were arranged especially for students anticipating going into the armed forces. There were also additional classes in languages taught, including those in Russian, Portuguese, and Japanese. And other new courses included things such as aeronautical meteorology, military geology, and the interpretation of maps for military purposes. Next slide.
After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, people were asking two main questions. One, how did this happen? And two, how can we prevent it from happening again? I'll talk a little bit about the second question later, but as for the first question, within months of the attack, the university was trying to answer that question for students. In the winter quarter of 2002, a new class was offered called Terror and Terrorism, which was a history of terror and terrorism from the French Revolution onward. In the class, students were supposed to gain a better understanding of the techniques and motivations behind terrorists. At one point, after the 9/11 Commission report was issued in 2004, that actually became required reading for the class. Later in 2002, in the fall, another class was added with the very sobering title of Development and Control of Weapons of Mass Destruction. And this was a look at the basic science of these weapons and their history and the methods that are used to stop their spread. Now, these classes are actually still offered through an interdisciplinary major called Security and Intelligence, and that's a brochure you see on that slide from the archives. This was launched in 2005 through the Undergraduate International Studies program, and it now actually covers a wide variety of topics such as food security and globalization and code making and code breaking. Next slide.
I think we've covered this a little bit, but to go into some more, how have the university's contributions made an impact during times of national crises?
So during World War I, Ohio State actually played a very large national role in two particular avenues, both militarily and through research. Because of lack of time, I'm just going to talk about its military aspect, but I do want to mention that the research that came out of Ohio State during World War I was very important, not only to the war effort, but in increasing Ohio State's stature as a research university. It's really when Ohio State started to become nationally recognized for its research. So getting back to the military aspect, we have 4 faculty members here who were really in favor of and lobbied for universities to host officer training programs on campuses and to increase the military training to increase preparedness for war. So these 4 faculty members, Ralph Mershon, President William Oxley Thompson, George Converse, and Edward Orton Jr. Went to Washington, D.C. in May of 1915, where they lobbied for what later became known as the Ohio Plan, which included increased military training and officer training programs. So next slide, please. So the Ohio Plan was incorporated into the National Defense Act of 1916. It increased military training hours for individuals and also provided credit for military classes where there hadn't been before. It also established what we now think of as ROTC. Next slide, please. So Ohio State, being a university that lobbied for training programs, of course had to have one of their own. So Ohio State became one of 6 schools to establish a ground school, which was preliminary training for men in the Signal Corps, which is what aviation was a part of. It opened in May of 1917. It was an 8-week course where men would come to campus and learn about signaling and gunnery, learn about engines and aerial observation, among other things. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember that these people, military trainees coming to campus, Ohio State had to make a lot of accommodations to have this program. So they gave up several buildings on campus exclusively for government use. These buildings included Hayes Hall and the Armory. It even included a cadet mess in the Ohio Union. So Ohio State really was important in supporting these programs and in helping to provide accommodations and being willing to give up some of their space to support the national effort. Next slide, please.
So there were some similar things going on during World War II. Ohio State was home to several special training programs. And during the war, thousands of servicemen who were already in uniform came to campus under one of these programs. There were so many soldiers coming to OSU at this time that the Army provided a shuttle between the Union Station in downtown Columbus, where the trains would arrive, to the stadium dormitories where the cadets lived while they were on campus. And just to give a brief highlight of some of the programs that were offered, next slide. The Navy Recognition School was Ohio State's unique contribution to the war effort. It started in 1942 and was a 60-day program that trained officers in the split-second identification of aircraft and ships, especially those of the enemy. The program was directed by Professor Samuel Renshaw of the psychology department. The roster of men who attended this program included those from the US Navy, the Marines, the Army, and the British and Canadian Air Force. By March of 1944, the program had graduated more than 2,000 men. The university faculty anticipated that thousands of lives and planes would be saved because of this program. Next slide, please. In 1943, OSU began hosting the Army Specialized Training Program, or the ASTP. This program, which lasted 13 weeks at a time, was designed to help meet the Army's needs for specialized technical training for certain Army tasks. The trainees were selected from enlisted men who had already completed their basic training. Ohio State was approved for the AST program for engineering courses, for training in psychology, for area and language training, and for medicine, veterinary medicine, and dentistry. That same year, OSU signed a contract with the War Department for the Specialized Training Assignment and Reclassification, or STAR program, which administered ability and aptitude tests for soldiers to see if they were eligible for specialized training. It also provided a refresher course in math, chemistry, and physics. Next slide, please.
It was because of the heavy military presence on campus and in Columbus in general that eventually led to Ohio State having an airport out on Sawmill Road. In 1942, the Navy began leasing part of Port Columbus for its pilot training program. And we were already there with our civilian pilot training program, and there just wasn't enough room for both of us. So a professor of mechanical engineering, who actually had been a lieutenant in the Air Corps in World War I, he went to President Beavis and said, you know, why don't we just build our own airport? And President Beavis liked the idea, and he allocated about $100,000 for the project. And the professor, Kurt Stinson, went out and surveyed the countryside himself to find a spot, and he found about 350 acres of flat land out off of Sawmill Road. In early 1943, construction began on the hangar and the runways. Later that year, Don Scott, this is the gentleman on your right in the photo, in the slide, he had been a very popular football player. He was involved in a lot of extracurricular activities when he was on campus, and he had left OSU to join the war effort. Unfortunately, in October of 1943, he was killed in a bomber training mission over England. Very shortly after that, though, the Board of Trustees decided to approve a proposal to name the OSU airport after him. And so in 1944, OSU's airport opened as Don Scott Field, and it quickly became the state's headquarters for its civilian air patrol program. Next slide.
So what are some examples of different restrictions that have been placed on campus, on the campus community during past times of crises?
So obviously there were restrictions during the 1918 pandemic, and we're going to talk about those. I just want to mention that Columbus and Ohio State in particular were not very hard hit relative to the rest of the country. So I don't think we can use these restrictions as an example of what happened for universities all over the country. We were pretty lucky. We only had 8 students die from influenza. And I think part of that can be thanks to Dr. Wingert, who was the faculty, he was a director of student health services during that time. We started getting a little bit more serious about the flu when it started creeping in to the country, and first hit Ohio State from the military trainees. They got sick and they were being evaluated when the influenza hit the student body. And the university made the decision immediately to shut down the university. So on October 13th, 1918, Campus closed to everyone. Everyone had to get off campus. All meetings were closed, all events, all classes. There was no sports. And about a month later, on November 11th, campus reopened. We don't have too much information about what life was like coming back to campus. According to some of the articles in the Lantern, it appears that it was a lot more normal than we would think relating to this pandemic. So it just looked like things continued as they had been before they shut campus down. They even had the rest of the football games that season. So a little bit different than today. Next slide, please.
So the Great Depression had a huge impact on the university. State appropriations significantly dropped in 1929 and over the next several years. The total depression cut, as it was called, was more than $4 million. A university group, later known as the Klein Committee, was assigned to complete a study of all the university's activities and to go through the budget basically with a fine-tooth comb. Then President George Reitmeyer said if curtailments and other changes were to be made to the university's budget, he said it was better for the university to do it rather than some outside agency. With enrollment remaining strong during this time, the university was expected to do more with less. This alumni magazine article states maximum service on minimum income, and that was essentially the ideal of the time. Next slide, please. President Reitmeyer stressed that the university would still provide the highest level of education to students, as it always had. Still, there were many cuts that had to be made during the Depression, which ended up including more than 200 eliminated faculty or staff positions, as well as the staff who were able to keep their jobs assumed heavier teaching loads. There was also a reduction in the number of courses offered. Some were abandoned altogether, while others had to be combined. Next slide.
I mentioned before that one of the questions people asked after the 9/11 attacks was, how do we prevent these from happening again? And after the attacks, universities across the country asked that question and thought about the possible landmarks on their campuses that might be targets for attacks. Ohio State was no different. The gentleman on the left is Bill Shakurty, who was then Executive Vice President of Business and Finance. He gathered together a sort of task force of staff members in his division, including members of the unit of the Office of Public Safety, and asked which targets might be next. An obvious possible target was the football stadium during games on Saturdays. So new protocols were put into place. They increased security personnel, they limited access to certain parts of the stadium, such as the field, and they also limited what fans could bring into the games, which is now why we all, I think, carry just little fanny packs in there when we attend games. This task force, though, wasn't just a one-time thing. The group met continually as new threats surfaced. Next slide, please. One happened in the form of an epidemic 2 years later in the early spring of 2003. The severe acute respiratory syndrome, known as SARS, originated in China and was spreading quickly across the globe. And this was of immediate concern to the university because later in the spring we would be holding commencement exercises, and families from these regions would want to attend to see their children graduate. There was a lot of discussion about what to do. Some people proposed banning these families from the exercises. Ultimately, the university did not have to make a really tough decision because by the time commencement occurred, the countries that had been affected by SARS had put protocols into place to test people who were leaving the country. So everyone was welcome and commencement went off as usual. This group actually evolved into what's now known as the Emergency Management Division of the Office of Public Safety. And that's the division that works with other local and state and even federal law enforcement agencies in preparedness activities. And if any of you remember the machete attack at Watts Hall a couple of years ago, that's the division that coordinated with the response from the university with those agencies. And that's the one that sent out the text alerts to shelter in place and updates on what was going on campus at the time. Next slide, please.
So how has Ohio State come together as a community during past periods of adversity?
So I had mentioned earlier the immense financial stress on the university during the Depression. During this time, the university administration and staff were obviously concerned for the financial welfare of the students. President Reitmeyer had promised that students, that the university would do all that it could in this emergency to assist them. A few examples of how the university came together to help them during this time included they started a student employment office. This was the predecessor to student financial aid. This was developed to help students find employment opportunities that had federal, university, and private funding. Next slide, please. The university also established a cooperative dormitory in 1933 where men with limited financial resources but high academic potential could obtain room and board at a very low cost. The southwest tower of the stadium was vacated and made available for 75 men at the time. The dormitory was called the Tower Club, and since it operated as cooperative housing, the students did all of the upkeep, including cooking, cleaning, and clerical work that would normally have been done by paid staff in other dormitories. Many say that they would not have been able to finish college if it weren't for the Tower Club. For women, an alumni cooperative house opened in 1935 on 10th Avenue. This house was also available for women of limited financial ability, but high scholastic standing. The women were also responsible for doing all of their cleaning and housework. And by the fall of 1935, there were 33 women living in the house. Next slide, please. The Ohio Union started offering students 10 and 20 cent depression meals in early 1933. And through the deans of men and women, there were also steps made for students who lacked funds to be able to eat at the university's 2 cafeterias under special regulations. About a third of the students at this time belonged to sororities and fraternities. So they served as a sort of safeguard for students. Students who were temporarily without funds for food and shelter would at least have a place to stay with their fees deferred. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that faculty and staff united during the Depression was by donating their time to an educational program that was set up at the university for individuals who are currently unemployed. This program, which started at OSU in 1933, was called the Emergency School, and it was meant for people who were not working towards credit for a university degree. The hope was that the unemployed could use these classes in order to enable them to secure work. The emergency school was hailed as an unparalleled experiment in education by former OSU president, William Oxley Thompson. Next slide. So we're gonna move on to World War II next. There were a number of programs bringing people together for a common cause during World War II. The Student War Board was created with a purpose to ensure a better coordination of student volunteer activities during the war emergency. The board created a variety of group and individual projects and promoted them on campus. Hundreds of students were recruited for war work both on and off the campus. These workers were known as SWAVEs, for Student War Activity Volunteers. Next slide, please. The SWAVEs worked on a number of projects, including helping residents to register for rationing, writing letters to servicemen, holding first aid classes, and working in settlement houses. Some of these individual projects achieved great results. For example, in the span of 2 months, about 5,000 books were collected to be sent to prisoners of war. And sales of war stamps and bonds in fraternity and sorority houses and elsewhere totaled near 3,000. One other interesting thing is one group was able to raise a significant amount of money in order to assist in the purchase of an ambulance. Next slide.
The grassroots reaction by the university to the 9/11 attacks is fairly small, but I think it shows the natural response by the Ohio State community to try to step up and do something when there's a crisis. And this is no different. As many of you may remember, the attacks occurred on a Tuesday, and within several days, Big Ten officials had decided to cancel all of the football games to be held the following Saturday out of security concerns. So Ohio State officials thought, well, we have a stadium, let's try, why don't we have a memorial service for the victims and their families? And that's what they did. The Ohio State University Marching Band made an appearance, as did the football team. A number of public officials spoke, as did then football coach Jim Tressel. As the Lantern later reported, instead of 100,000 plus screaming fans decked out in scarlet and gray, more than 15,000 somber memorial attendees showed up wearing red, white, and blue. Instead of the usual game fare, concession stands gave out American flags and took Red Cross donations. These were actually financial donations. And in fact, the entire event was a fundraiser for the victims and their families. Next slide, please.
So hopefully by telling you all these things that we've uncovered at the archives, you can see, I think this is a great quote, that from the start, the university has shown something of the spirit by which it has since been characterized. What it set out to do, it did. And so with that, we are going to take questions. I will admit that I am new to how to do this. So Casey may have to jump in and help me. Because for some reason I can't. Oh, there we go. I got it. All right. Let's start from the top. So Connor asks, this is fascinating. It's interesting to hear how many parallels there are from these crises to the present one we find ourselves in. It shows the importance of the archives. Thank you. What would we say, what would the archives say is the biggest lesson learned that we can apply to today from all of this history and research? I'm waiting for one of you to jump in.
Well, honestly, I think it does demonstrate throughout the history of the university that, you know, we have reacted when we've done what we needed to do as a university and as individuals whenever there was a crisis. A university is a natural place for people to innovate and be creative about how to deal with these crises. And I think, you know, over time, all of these examples show that.
Yeah, I don't know if that was the first thing that came to mind for me too, is that the biggest thing that I think we've all learned is that how much the university always comes together, and there's always helpers in the university who are trying to find some way to contribute. It was really great to learn about all of these things and how much people who have been part of the university have tried to help.
I agree with that. The one thing I noticed as I was doing research is the overarching theme was kind of a coming together for the greater good. And I think during this time that was a very hopeful thing to find in all of this.
So we have a couple questions. So coming in the Q&A spot. So Howard is asking, thank you for the presentation. I'm glad you've enjoyed it so far, Howard. Our presentation did not mention the Korean War, or for that matter, the Vietnam era. Do we have any comments? I would say that in terms of those two, I think I mentioned at the beginning, we started doing the research based on a request from what the Alumni magazine was looking for. So we kind of, as we created this presentation, that's how it ended up going. I don't know if any of you want to comment on that, those two wars. If anybody has anything that we can, if you have specific questions, we can do some research and into those though.
Yeah, unfortunately, with the limit of the time limit of the presentation and the fact that we all were actually learning this too as we went along, and some of these subjects, you know, such as the Great Depression and World War II, are just enormous, that we just didn't have time to look at the Korean War or the Vietnam War and what OSU did for those.
So Christine has a question here about the unrest on the university's campus after the shooting at Kent State. So I don't know, Kevlin, you want to take that one?
What is the question?
So the question is, was there unrest on campus after the shooting at Kent State in the summer?
There was a tremendous amount of unrest that whole spring. Because students were upset, not only, I mean, that's what touched off a huge demonstration, but they were also mad about various things like the Vietnam War, the treatment and inclusion of African Americans on campus and in the curriculum, as well as women, even a child care center. They were pressing against the administration on all these issues. Actually, after Kent State, it was right before Kent State that we had one of our biggest demonstrations. The administration shut down for 2 weeks. It was kind of like today, everybody had to be out. You had to be out by 5 p.m. The day after it was announced, and students had to go wherever they could go. So after we came back, we actually did have commencement. Students were allowed, like today, to take classes pass-fail for that quarter, if they wanted to, if they chose to. Then the administration slowly, and it had been doing this, trying to meet some of the students' demands. So this is why we now have the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Women's Place, of a Department of African American and African Studies, and Department of Women's Studies, and a child care center.
I should also mention that the Archives has an online exhibit on the spring of, what was called the Spring of Dissent, so the 1970 demonstrations. And Christine, we'd be happy to send you the link via email if you'd like. We'd be happy to send that to you. It's off of, or if you go to our website, the University Archives website, and click on online exhibits, it's there as well.
Tamara, I can find it, and Christine, I will put a link under your question so just give me 1 minute and I'll do that.
Thanks, Hallie. So the next question, Molly's asking, where was the university farm located?
Well, we were actually on Neal Farm. So I think that they, you know, we had the classroom building. The president's house was actually the farmhouse, the main farmhouse at 15th and High. And then there was another farmhouse, kind of where I think the library is now, Thompson Library. And so they're a smaller farmhouse, and then there were barns and, you know, fields, obviously. So I don't know exactly where it was. I know that crops were grown on the oval, right, Tamar? As sort of
yes.
A classroom type of experience for students. And, but like I said, you know, somebody had to manage all of that. So Norton Townsend took that on. We have the slide I showed is a glass slide by Joseph Bradford, who was started the photography and cinema department and was university architect for many years. And there's a number of those slides that he took of the farm.
We also mentioned that the Archives has digitized a number of our campus maps that are available online. And so if you want to, in some cases, you can see kind of where the woods were and some other things like that. So that is on our Flickr gallery online as well. So just to throw that out there. So Laura's saying she really enjoyed this. Thanks, Laura. From a logistical standpoint, she's impressed with the amount of digitized material we had on hand to create the presentation. If we had access to physical collections, so if we were in the archives, are there any additional resources that we might have been able to add more details?
I would say I would love to have gone through some of the president's files. to see what was in Reitmeyer's collections to maybe find some more information that would be detailed, details about the Depression. But I think, looking through some of those files could have been more helpful with more details, like I said, but luckily we were still able to find a lot with what we had.
Yeah, I would say a lot of our stuff that we found was using the lantern. We used annual reports I just lost my train of thought. The OSU histories that were written from different time periods. Those are available through the Hothy Trust. Were really important. But yeah, it would have been great to get more into specific collections.
And all of the resources that Hallie just mentioned are on our digital resources page on our website, so anyone can access them.
Cecilia said, wonderful presentation, thank you. How can a history enthusiast and alum follow up on elements of this presentation with the archive staff? So hopefully you can still see the slide that says questions, and there's our contact information. Probably the best way and the easiest way is to use our email. So archives@osu.edu. That will get to any one of us is able to answer that, is to retrieve messages from that email. It's really the best. I think that phone number we were going to change. I think that's Kevlin's direct line. It should actually, it should really be 614-292-2409. That's the main archives number. You can still call Kevlin, but if you, if you want to call the general number, but really, if you can, email, of course, depending on your question, we may want to call you and get into more information. Sometimes email is great because we can send you links to different sites that might be helpful depending on your questions.
I would just add, it's also better for email because you can send it whenever you want, obviously, and we'll be able to answer it. We're answering the main line, and I will answer my phone when it rings, obviously, but only during work hours. And if we're away from our desk, it doesn't capture a voicemail. At least the main line doesn't. Mine will, but the main line won't. So email really is better.
So someone's asking, did OSU have any involvement in the development of a vaccine test or personal protection equipment during the 1918 influenza pandemic, the way we are today during COVID-19? I don't believe so. Hallie, I know you looked into this more than I did, but I have not seen that in the research that I've done on the influenza pandemic.
Yeah, I'd have to look into it more to give a definite answer. And if you are interested in following up with me, you just send an email to archives@osu.edu. But in the annual reports that I read for those years, I didn't see anything about that.
So Howard's added a couple comments just related to what happened in spring of 1970, that the university was shut down for 2 weeks. Yes, we were. He's adding, he must have been on campus, that the environment was unbelievable. Tear gas was used and got into the Commerce Library, which was in Page Hall, which is of course now the home of the Glenn College. And that's where he was doing some research. Let's see, Carrie is asking, do you have an example of how two different departments came together to innovate and interconnect to create a solution at a time of crisis?
I can answer that one only because I had just briefly mentioned it in the presentation. The electrical engineering department and the home economics department, along with volunteers, came together to make bandages, and that photo of the woman rolling bandages, that was developed by professors at electrical engineering. So they kind of formed a connection in that way, and that they were able to innovate a way to more efficiently create bandages.
Does anybody else have any other examples that you saw? Can't think of any. That's fine. If we think of something else, we can follow up with you too. Well, I think we're at time. If you do have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. We love to do research. We have also a folder of things we can't answer until we get access to our collections. But we have those all ready to go once we get back to the archives. Casey, is there anything that you want? Oh, I'm looking, hold on. There's two ways. I just want to make sure there's nothing that I missed.
Looks like there's a few questions in the chat box. So if you want to hang on and answer those, I know we are at time, so I know the attendees will need to, some attendees may need to leave, but we can answer these afterwards and post them somewhere, or if you want to continue on, there's just a couple in the chat box too.
Okay, so there's just a couple that I just am looking at from the chat box. Let me go up here. What are we doing differently during COVID-19 that we may not have done in the past? Well, one thing, of course, is the telework environment. When the university shut down for the flu epidemic, we couldn't, obviously, there was no Zoom. So I think some of the things that we're able to do, some of the classes we're able to teach, both when we closed down in 1918 and when we closed down in 1970, didn't happen. One of the fun things that I saw at one point about when we closed in 1918 is the Lantern told students to pay attention to their local newspapers to know when to come back to campus. So now, of course, we have a much faster way of communicating to all of our students, either by email or text alerts. So that's one of the sort of fun things that is a little bit different today than it was at the time. Also, someone who's any record of pushback on restrictions during the 1918 pandemic. I haven't seen any, but remember that we, those of you who are faculty and staff and potentially students, the archives is trying to do a survey to collect reactions to what's going on right now with COVID-19. One of the reasons that we've decided to do that is because we don't really have much or hardly anything at all of what were the reactions of the students or the military soldiers on campus or the faculty and staff. So it's hard to make a definitive, to definitively answer that question without having the resources. And of course, that's the challenge in archives, is we can only provide what we have. So I don't know, Hallie, if there was anything else that you saw.
There's very little, and even when I was trying to see what was in our physical collections that I might be missing out on, there was almost not. There was one folder in a president's papers. There's really not much.
So we have what we have, and we can use what we have. Alicia's asking what kind of artifacts or information would be beneficial for us to collect. I talked about our, with the current COVID-19 situation, I talked about our survey. Kevlin, I don't know, can you just touch on what you're trying to collect right now?
Well, I'm trying to collect any information I can. I just wrote this in my performance evaluation that I'm collecting email messages, president's updates, things that are going out. There are people in the medical center who are in their communications department that are uploading things to Buckeye Box related to COVID-19 for us. And of course the surveys. As far as artifacts, I so far have a mask that apparently was being worn by someone on campus, but not one of the first responders, just a regular staff member, because I do try to keep an eye toward the future. 50 years from now, we can give lectures. I can't. I won't be working here because I'll be dead. But someone in the archives will want to tell people what it was like now, and people respond very well to artifacts. It's a great, I could talk for hours, but you have an artifact and people can really see what was going on then. So if anyone who's still on the call still, has something or has ideas, please email us at archives@osu.edu and I'll try to track it down.
All right.
All right.
Well, again, thank you. So Casey, I'll let you finish up.
Yep, looks like that was all the questions. So thank you all so much. I know I learned a lot. And thank you all attendees for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.